like we are wired to avoid discomfort more than anything else. So it feels kind of unfair to like purposely make yourself uncomfortable, which again, there's a difference between being okay or tolerating being uncomfortable versus torturing yourself. No, like you shouldn't be having panic attacks. You don't deserve to
Right.
experience it. But we do need to allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling and like keep that maintained without dissociating and being completely numb, as you said.
I'm leaving on a chocolate. Don't know when I'll be back again. Oh, babe, I have to go.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Dial-A-Pilot podcast. We're here with Dr. Holly. She's a psychologist up in the Pacific Northwest area, and she has had a interesting, I guess, journey with a little bit of fear of flying, particularly while you were applying to grad school. So, Dr. Holly, first of all, welcome. Thanks for being here, and we'd love to hear your story about, first of all, receiving your doctorate. Amazing. Congratulations. That's not an easy feat. And then
Oh.
overcoming your fear of flying and kind of how you manage that, and coaching people through their own fears in your day job nowadays. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I love your page, your Instagram, your podcast. This is such a great resource. My colleague referred me to your page for my clients, and I've been using it for myself. So, awesome job. Thank you for this resource.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, glad to do it.
Yeah, so as a clinical psychologist, I'm trained in treating anxiety disorders, depression, OCD, trauma, and my main specialty here in Seattle, Washington, where I'm based, is in anxiety disorders. And while I was in grad school, I was at a point in my life where I had really low anxiety. I loved flying. My father lived in India for 2 years. My parents lived in opposite parts of the country. I was always traveling. I loved visiting my grandparents in Florida, and being on an airplane was so much fun. Turbulence was like a roller coaster, and I actually enjoyed it. My twin sister and I would be like, "Ooh, that was such a bumpy flight," and we would want it. And it took one flight. It was from Honolulu to San Francisco for my 26th birthday, and it was extremely turbulent flight, and it was the first time where I thought, oh no, this is it. This is how I go down. And I think it was because it was my birthday. There was a lot of things that I was realizing I wasn't finished with in my life. And so I was in the process, I was in grad school, but that upcoming year, I would be having interviews across the country for my residency, or it's the last year of the PhD program. And it really swept, like, it really caught me off guard. I was someone who prided myself in being very studious, very calm. Actually, now that I say that, I actually am a kind of baseline anxious person, but I get really passionate about things. But I never had a fear of flying. And for whatever reason, I took a lot of pride in that. In college, I took intro to flight. I wanted to get my individual pilot license. I took off. I landed an airplane in Napa Valley. I loved it. I loved flying around in the Bay Area. And then all of a sudden, I was scared of flying. In fact, I started dreading the flights I had coming up. I lived in California at the time, had to fly to Orlando for Thanksgiving to visit my mother and my family there. And I was terrified. There was a couple of winter storms going on. My brother-in-law and my sister were sitting next to me when they saw me have like a full-blown panic attack in the back of the airplane. I remember just sitting there thinking, okay, cool. This is a textbook example of a panic attack. I know what's happening, but why won't it stop? And why can't I get off this airplane? When are we going to land? And we had just taken off from SFO. So I started noticing some avoidance patterns. One, I was like, do I really have to take that flight? Maybe I'm going to avoid red eyes. I think morning flights are better because there's less turbulence or there's less storms. Um, I, I used all my resources. I downloaded all the meditation apps that exist. I bought some, expensive lavender essential oil. I prayed more than I normally did, and I started kind of developing a little bit of a ritual to prepare myself for the flight. I started really being mindful, overly, I guess, excessive about where I was going to sit on the airplane. I didn't want to sit in the front. The back seemed like a safer place to be based on statistics and how when there's crashes. And it really wasn't until I started studying more about anxiety and specifically OCD, how these types of rituals really maintain anxiety for the long run. And so, just to get to where I am now, once I started having to fly again more consistently, I had about 15 interviews somewhere in California where I was based, but I really wanted to end up on the East Coast for my residency. And so, in order to get to my dream interviews, I had to get on an airplane. And through gradual exposure, essentially, it was actually like flooding. I had no choice. I went on the airplane. I was freaking out. I started to get more comfortable with flying, and I got really passionate about treating flight anxiety. And it's something I treat today as a psychologist. It's also really interesting because there's so many different types of flight anxiety, and we can get into a little bit of that too.
I'd
But
love to.
that's my
Yeah.
personal side.
Incredible. So, okay, let me ask you this. When is, like, what time of year is your birthday?
December.
Okay. It's so funny you say that. I don't know if you know this. I actually flew Honolulu to San Francisco
Yeah.
this morning. That was
That's so
I did a
funny.
red eye. Yeah. So we landed in San Francisco at 6 a.m. and it was a nice, smooth flight. There was a couple areas of turbulence on the way today. And when we were looking at the flight planning paperwork, we looked at it and we're like, it's smooth tonight. I mean, there were some shifting winds, which can cause some turbulence, but we took off. We climbed all the way to 35,000 feet, leveled off, seatbelt sign came off. And then about 30 minutes into the flight, we just got this, I would call it moderate chop for like 30 seconds, seatbelt sign on, right back off. And then about an hour later, we got it again. We climbed 1,000 feet to 36,000 feet, which is how we deal with a lot of this turbulence. And it was smooth the rest of the flight. All the way into San Francisco, there wasn't a bump. But we were talking about it, the captain and I, and we said, you know, in Hawaii, there can be coming from, you know, the Hawaiian Islands towards the West Coast, towards California. During the winter season, there can be kind of Pineapple Express storms, and that can create a little bit of turbulence that goes on. And so what we'll do in those moments is we'll actually change the routes that we're flying coming back from the islands. We have routes that are set up, and they're from north to south. All of the waypoints on the north track are named with, they start with the letter A. So that's the Alpha track. And then south of that, I think it's 60 miles, the Bravo track. South of that, the Charlie track. So we'll actually shift. But sometimes that weather is just, it stretches hundreds of miles. And so we have to go through some of that turbulence. But as soon as you said Honolulu to San Francisco, I'm like, this has got to be a winter flight. Because that's just when we kind of run into that stuff. But that's amazing. I actually didn't know that you had done introductory flights and really had that passion for aviation before this kind of, you know, so to speak, incident flight happened. So tell me a little bit about that, your flight there in Napa.
Okay, so it's, I mean, my interest in flight started in Ohio, where I went to high school. And actually, to be really frank, I don't think I was really that interested. I think I just wanted to be cool. And there was a guy I had a crush on who was getting his pilot's license, or maybe he already had his pilot's license, you know, at 18 years old or however, you know, whatever. Senior
That's a
years.
high conviction crush.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, you know what, I could do that too. I'm going to a small school. It's a very small liberal arts college in California called PUC. And they actually have their own, I mean, they have their own runway. They have their own mini airport in Angwin, so north of Napa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I've flown into Angwin.
Oh, really? That's so cool.
Yeah,
It's so small. So I was like, of course I'm going to take Intro to Flight my freshman year of college. And this is going to sound so weird, but I think that like the more information I learned about how planes work, that's like the budding start of my anxiety, because I didn't really understand how things work. But once I knew all the things that could go wrong, I actually started getting more anxious about it then. And so taking off and landing on I think the first exam, maybe the last exam, they were okay. They were smooth. I mean, I just didn't want to fail. I just cared more about the grade, and I just remember it not being fun. I just wanted to do well. But when I look back on it, I'm like, I can't believe I did that, because that's definitely something I wouldn't be comfortable doing now on a very small airplane. I mean, I don't even know what kind of plane it was. I can't even remember now, but I have a picture with it.
That's awesome. So yeah, those little airplanes, just to point this out for anybody listening, if that makes you nervous, is those little airplanes are a completely different beast from the airliners that, you know, we are flying on. And I'm going to and flying for work. Granted, I love flying the small airplanes. That's like my passion in life, is doing
Okay.
what we call general aviation. So I go fly those things all the time and go with my
Mm-hmm.
buddies, and it's like my thing. But I just want to point out that what you were learning, there are so many more things with those little. I'm talking
Mm.
single engine, small
Yes.
airplanes. There's so many more things that can go wrong that are more um, impactful, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
that we have to risk manage when we're actually out flying those little small general aviation airplanes. So I'm thinking through when I'm flying the little airplane. Okay, if I have an engine failure on takeoff, I need to know where I can glide the airplane to. If I have an engine failure on short final, I need to know
Mm.
that I can make the runway. I'm
Mm-hmm.
managing my energy for that state. All of those things play into this. Whereas in the big airplanes, if we have an engine failure during the takeoff roll, right before we actually lift off the runway, it's no problem whatsoever. We have the other engine that has enough thrust to carry us away from the
Excellent.
runway, away from all of the terrain in the area, no matter if you're in Kansas City or Aspen, Colorado. It has been
Mm.
charted out that we can get away from that terrain. And then the same thing with approaches, the same thing with,
Cool.
San Francisco to Honolulu. That's 2,300 miles over water. Well, if you have
Mm-hmm.
a problem over there, an engine failure, a decompression, anything like that, we have charted it out that no matter what, we can make the land. Even if we're the farthest point away that we can
Mm.
possibly
Interesting.
be, we have enough
Mm-hmm.
fuel to descend the airplane all the way down to an area that we don't need the pressurization, so we can breathe the oxygen normally
Mm-hmm.
and fly the airplane the rest of the way and land even on a single engine. So there's just so much more that goes into these airliners as
Right.
far as what we're looking at, the risk that we're managing,
Mm-hmm.
and just the infrastructure of commercial aviation. So yeah, I can totally understand how, if that, like, you have that little seed of anxiety beforehand and you don't know that you have it, and all of a sudden you start to
Right.
realize the little airplane stuff, because the whole pilot training, all
Mm-hmm.
you're learning about is what can go wrong and how you could
Yeah.
fix it. And so I could see how that would be anxiety inducing, and starting to kind of like, oh, I'm, the eyebrow raise moment, learning those things.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's pretty amazing though. You actually went out and uh, got to do that in college. That's a fantastic
Mm-hmm.
little place, Angwin. So good for
That's
you.
so
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so neat. It's such a small place. I mean, obviously beautiful. I think that when I started, yeah, when the anxiety started, what kept it going longer, what kept it more intense was my resistance to it. It was, I can't be anxious about this. I'm about to be a psychologist. I can't be scared. I can't let this take over my life. I mean, in a way, that motivation was helpful. Again, my dream interview happened in Boston, and I had to go to it. It was my first interview. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to say no to like an interview with at Harvard. Of course I'm going to take that internship interview. And yet I don't know. I think that if I didn't have that, I don't know, that like motivation, I would have 100% absolutely not. I'm not going. It's not worth it. And so where I get really concerned as a psychologist for my patients are when people are saying no to weddings, or saying no to funerals, they're saying no to like vacations and trips with their family. And that's when we see, okay, now anxiety has gone to the point where you're missing out. So that's why it's really helpful to either get in with a professional, really get to be very clear about what is flight anxiety taken away from your life. And can we be clear that we have to find a way to not let it take over your life anymore? So that's why I appreciate you and your resource. I guess I'm just finding myself just talking and talking about this. Um, is that when we're getting anxious, I think it's also important to know that like it's okay. Like it's normal to be anxious. Like anxiety serves its purpose. And so I was
absolutely.
against it. I was like,
Yeah,
no, what's wrong with me? It's not rational. Like it's, everyone always says, I'm sure you hear this all the time, right? It's more dangerous to be behind the wheel than in an airplane. But like the reality is, I mean, we all know it is scary to be like in a tin tube, like in 30,000 feet in the air. I don't know how many feet it is in the air, right? It's
yeah,
just,
absolutely.
that's
One
scary.
of the first ways that I always start our calls with, no matter who I'm talking to, whether I've
Yeah.
talked to them 3 times before or this is the first time ever, I always remind them, like, I know that you think this is an irrational fear, but it's really not. You're getting in a metal tube at 40,000 feet at 500 miles an hour with two people in charge that you have never met before. That is
Good
objectively
point.
scary. So it's
Mm-hmm.
perfectly fine to have questions about it and say, hey, can you just tell me how this is going to work so that I can, rest assured that while I'm in the back watching my movie, it's all handled the way it needs to be handled. So I think it's a totally normal thing for people to have that anxiety around it. And, one of the things that we see is acceptance is such a big step in going, hey, you know what? I am nervous and this scares me a little bit. And I'm just going to go explore that and
I
kind
like
of
that.
allow that to be a part of the journey. And I think that that's really, really a big part of taking the first step forward in overcoming that anxiety and not letting it control you. Cause yeah, exactly what you just said. If you're getting on the airplane and you're nervous, that's okay. It's if you're not getting on the airplane and missing out on, siblings' weddings or big life events or things that you just want to go do or travels that you want to take, that's where, we really find a lot of pride and a lot of joy in helping folks get through that specifically. And hey, let's get you to those places. And it's okay to be
Absolutely.
anxious, but we'll be the resource, we'll be the hand to hold to get you on the airplane and comfortable with talking to the folks that are actually doing this on a daily basis. Because the folks that are actually up there, none of us fell into this by accident. Like we worked our whole lives to be up there, and this is our number one passion in the world. Maybe outside of our families, but I think that's a really big point too. Is just to say like, hey, come on up, have a chat with us. Let's talk.
Cool.
Sit down in the cockpit. We'll show you what we got going on up here, and I think just giving people that resource has been number one. It's been just amazing to see people being able to travel and enjoy themselves, but also it's been really rewarding for us and the whole team over here at Dial Pilot. We just love doing it. It's really fun. So anyways, I kind of cut you off there.
No, it's fine.
As far as the other tools that you would recommend, as far as, when people are experiencing this anxiety, and are there other tools that you would recommend, or is it more of a, hey, build yourself a structure that allows you to sit in this and have that feeling, but have a resource that you're using in the background? Like, what is your clinical recommendation there?
Yeah, no, yeah. So it's fun. So for listeners, Kyle and I were talking about my opinion against some of the meditation apps that are really popular. And the reason why I think it's better not to, I mean, okay, I'll just reword this. At the very start of this, it's really important to know just like how severe your anxiety is. So like naturally it's anxiety provoking to go on an airplane. I think it's a little abnormal not to be nervous at all, but then again, there's people who aren't nervous. I was that person too. If you are avoiding things, we're more on the severe end. If you're going and you're having panic attacks, that also is moderate to severe. That's just uncomfortable. So first, if you are going to either work with a professional or you're going to just get really aware of yourself, it's really important to recognize like how much is this anxiety kind of taking on your life. So anxiety has three components: the physical aspect, so like basically stress. So is your heart rate super high during the flight? I know that because I wear an Apple Watch and it tells me I could be sitting down and then I get the high heart rate notification even if I'm totally calm. Muscle tension, GI issues, right? So there's a physical component to anxiety, and then there's the cognitive part, the thoughts, right? Oh no, I'm anxious. Oh no, the plane's gonna go down. Oh no, is this how I'm gonna die? I'm scared. I'm anxious. I don't want to get a panic attack. I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to get kicked off the airplane. That's a fear that a lot of people have right
Oh
now.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And then what are our behaviors? So really get clear about what are your behaviors. And these are the things we do and don't do related to our anxiety. Things we might be doing are, yeah, are we praying? Are we doing some sort of ritual? Are we doing stuff that's really rigid to get us on the airplane? Are we avoiding certain things? Are we avoiding certain topics? Are we avoiding airplanes? We're avoiding TV shows that have an airplane on it, or even a crash in an airplane, social media. So as we get really clear, this is basically just saying, let's get really self-aware of where your anxiety is. Once we can do that, then we can get clear about what resources are actually going to be helpful. For some of us, it's really helpful to just get more information on how planes work, right? So Dial Pilot's a really great resource for that too. For others, getting too much information might not be helpful, right? Or it's helpful to the level where you have to have it every single time, and that might not be good either, because then we're starting another kind of ritual. We're starting a very vicious cycle. I wish I had more time because I would talk a lot about what safety behaviors are and how that can get in the way of exposure therapy. And so, as far as resources, the last thing I'll share too is, yes, distraction can work usually in the short term. If the distraction or if the thing or if the app or the book or the comfort item gets you on the airplane, that's great. We want that. If the distraction helps us do more exposure therapy, which is actually going on the airplane, that's even better. But if the distraction is lowering our anxiety to zero, so you're not feeling anything, that's actually not helpful. It's important to maintain a small level of anxiety, um, because that's actually what's helping rewire our brain to recognize that anxiety is not a bad thing. Turbulence is not a bad thing. We want to rewire the brain to be okay with being uncomfortable, not feeling completely 100% relaxed, which kind of gets me into why I'm like not the biggest fan of medications before, self-medicating. I mean, that can include, a benzodiazepine described from your, prescribed from your PCP or psychiatrist. But this is also like drinking alcohol before a flight or having, because that it wears off, right? And then you need more, and there's a rebound effect. So
Totally.
ideally, if we use a SUDS rating, so 0 to 10, 10 being the most anxious you've ever been, zero being nothing, it's okay. We want to look for like a 5 and 4, maybe 6. We don't want to be like 8, 9, and 10. That's not going to be pleasant for, an 8-hour flight. But if we can maintain like 4, 3, or 5, that's okay. We want to
Right.
get our bodies used to that. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I don't have a
Yeah, yeah.
specific,
And so that refers,
research.
so that rating you just used, that would basically be, an example would be somebody that had a really severe fear of
Mhm.
flying, panic attack sort of thing, maybe as a 10 during an
Mhm.
episode like that. And, in their journey to get through that, lowering that number down to a 6 and then lowering it down to a 5 and then lowering it down to a
Mhm.
4, but maybe never actually getting all the way to a 0,
Mhm.
which is that kind of, would you call that like a disassociation?
So yeah, I mean that's a good question. The reason why it's not helpful to be completely relaxed is the numbing, sort of like dissociating. If we are afraid, if we're avoiding the actual feeling or the discomfort, we're going to need that the next time. We're not actually telling our brain, I mean, we're avoiding, we're not actually telling our brain, we're not allowing our brain to associate. Let's just use turbulence as an example, turbulence as a non-dangerous experience, right? Because every time turbulence happens, if we're avoiding the actual feeling that comes up, we're gonna have to do that same exact thing the next time. So that's like kind of the cycle, the vicious cycle part of anxiety is if we're always doing something that lowers the anxiety right away, we're not allowing our bodies to be okay with being uncomfortable. And the reality is, I mean, that's the times we live in right now is why would anyone want to be uncomfortable all the time? Like we are wired to avoid discomfort more than anything else. So it feels kind of unfair to like purposely make yourself uncomfortable, which again, there's a difference between being okay or tolerating being uncomfortable versus torturing yourself. No, like you shouldn't be having panic attacks. You don't deserve to
Right.
experience it. But we do need to allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling and like keep that maintained without dissociating and being completely numb, as you said.
Right. So would that be like in the nervous flyer's mind? I'm trying to draw up in my mind what this photo looks like. Is that like,
Okay.
okay, we get into the turbulence, the seatbelt sign comes on, you hear the flight attendants be seated immediately, call, and it's like, oh, okay, I don't like this feeling that I'm having right now. Instead of trying to go the like, whatever, I don't care, you go the more route of like, this is anxiety. Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
okay. I know that I'm going to be safe, but I can feel this and I know that I will get through this. Is that kind of like the psyche that one maybe should have in those moments, or is there a different kind of like self-talk
Mm-hmm.
that is healthy in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, every psychologist will probably say something similar to what I'm about to say is it really depends on the individual and depends on like their patterns. If we're saying this is okay, it's okay, it's okay, and it becomes kind of ritualistic, that might not be helpful because that's could be a safety behavior. However, and again, it depends on how high your anxiety actually is. So that's why again, it's different for everyone. If you're at a 10 and saying it's okay, I'm going to be okay, and that lowers it, that's fine. But I guess I'll I guess what I'll say is if we are again, if we're numbing ourselves, it's not going to work. So I'll try to give a more general mindset that could be helpful that hopefully applies to most people. Turbulence happens, you're sitting there and you can label You just label what is, right? Okay, the plane is shaking a little bit. What am I feeling right now in my body? Okay, heart rate's going up, muscle tension. All right, I see that, I observe it. You're kind of like just, instead of dissociating, numbing it and ignoring it, you're kind of taking an outside perspective, and you're not so attached to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So in
yeah.
acceptance and command therapy, we call it cognitive diffusion. It's like this simple shift between I'm anxious versus I'm feeling anxious. So you're not fused, you're not like really attached to this identity, which can help us like have more hope. It can help us be more resilient. So, oh, I'm feeling a little bit anxious. I'm feeling my heart rate go up. I'm feeling more tense versus, oh no, I'm tense, I'm anxious. If someone's afraid of having a panic attack, maybe we do have to use some distraction methods. If someone is just afraid of turbulence in general, then it really is helpful to just label what's going on and then say like, can I tolerate being uncomfortable for 10 more seconds? How much can I tolerate? Okay, can't tolerate anymore. That's when I get my book out. That's when I hold on to my stuffed animal. That's when I pull out my phone and change the song or listen to my meditation. But if we can tolerate just a little bit longer than we're used to, that's how we're rewiring the brain to, I mean, this is inhibitory learning. This is, oh man, there's all these like psych terms. There's habituation there, but what's most helpful is expectancy violation, which essentially means the thing that I was expecting to happen. So maybe it's turbulence. I thought I was going to have a panic attack. Turbulence, the plane's going to go down. Didn't happen. So now my brain is associated turbulence with it being okay. Like it's just a thing that happens instead
Right.
of, yeah, again, as you can see, I can talk about this for way too long.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's great. And one of the things that brought up for, well, there's two things that brought up for me. One, this is just an amazing growing experience for anybody that's going through this. That, you know, if you're able to go in and in a moment of anxiety and a moment of discomfort, be able to label the things that you're feeling and experiencing, that, I mean, that pays dividends further down the line too, because it's, you know, those feelings are going to come up in life elsewhere, you know, outside of
Good point.
flying,
Mm-hmm.
wherever it is. So I think that that's, you know, kind of a beautiful way to like, okay, cool, well, I'm going to go grow on this flight, which is just always a good
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. But the other thing on expectancy violation, I think you called it, we talk a lot in aviation about confirmation bias, which is, it seems to me like the cousin of this. And that a
Mm-hmm.
confirmation bias for us from the flight deck perspective is I am anticipating something is happening and I'm seeing details that are starting to prove that, but now I'm confirming those details without actually having the context. And so, for example, one of the things that we talk a lot about is that folks will see, you know, they'll be experiencing turbulence and they'll
Mm-hmm.
see, oh, well, there was this one flight 2.5 years ago that had turbulence and, you know, 9 people were injured and that's going to happen to me and the airplane's going to break. And
Yeah.
the airplanes don't break apart in turbulence. So, you know, it's like, okay, let's be able to interrupt that confirmation bias that's going on and allow that expectation violation to occur that says, although this is uncomfortable and that's, you know, something that I need to experience and deal with, I am in a safe environment. And I think that's a big part of the piece that, you know, my team and I are trying to put in place as well. Like, hey, here's what's actually going on in the flight deck so that instead of
Mm-hmm.
this confirmation bias going on of there's turbulence, we're crashing, it's there's turbulence. Okay, we're probably not crashing. In fact, we're definitely not crashing. And here's what's actually happening. And so all of a sudden you may hear that engine noise spool up as we try and find a new altitude or spool down. And I always tell people on our calls too, I'm like, but don't hang on to that because we don't always change altitude. Sometimes that turbulence is short lived. Sometimes we can't climb because there's traffic above us. So, you know, giving folks that mindset that's like,
I
hey,
like
we can
that.
interrupt this confirmation bias. We can get to that expectation violation and allow
Mm-hmm.
ourselves to, you know, recognize that it's uncomfortable, but I'm in a safe environment. And we've seen from the folks that we've talked to, that is a massive, massive help
Oh
to,
yeah.
you know, give people that tool. So it's been, I would say that that's probably the biggest, asset that we have been able to
Mm-hmm.
find at Dial-A-Pilot and kind of, you know, what our calls have held. Dr. Holly, you may or may not know this. When I first started the service, I thought this was going to be like a turbulence forecasting thing. I thought it was going to be 10-minute
Ah,
calls. I thought people were going to call in and say, hey, what's the turbulence like for LA to
yeah.
Philadelphia today? And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, after our first like 10 calls, they were all going, 30, 45 minutes. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is a bigger problem than I actually realized it is. And so it's just evolved into this and, where we're going and over the next couple months and couple years. So, gosh, it's been fun to, share about aviation and teach and just create
Mm-hmm.
these relationships. It's pretty cool to see people be able to get out there and go face that anxiety. Cause we all know
Mm-hmm.
anxiety is not fun. So to be
Mm-hmm.
able to go out there and actually face that and overcome it, that is something very much worth celebrating. So, I'm grateful for partnerships with folks like you, Dr. Holly, and being able to share from our perspective from the aviation side of things and your perspective from the mental health side of things to be able to
Mm-hmm.
put all of this together. So, thank you for your time. I'm so grateful to have that. Anything else you'd like to share for folks that are going through this? Recommendations, anything?
Sure. I think for those who are listening who struggle with it, to struggle with flight anxiety, travel anxiety, just turbulence. I mean, there's so many different types of fears related to it. Mine specifically was death anxiety, and then also just difficulty with the unknown. But the reality is, like, it is perfectly human to be afraid of the unknown, right? And specifically, empowering yourself with this idea that you can tolerate the unknown. And if you can get to a place where you can tolerate uncertainty, which being on an airplane is kind of uncertain, right? Someone else is, you're not in control. But if you can get to that place where you can just simply tolerate it, you don't have to embrace it, you don't have to love flying, you don't have to be excited about flying, but if you can just tolerate it, that's where you gain freedom from your anxiety. That's where you gain freedom in your life. And that, I mean, of course, that applies to so many other areas in your life too. And so that empowerment and recognition that you can do this, right? I can do it. All of us can really face our fears. That really starts to pay its dividends in other areas of your life. So thank you for having me, Kyle. This is so fun to talk about. And as you can see, I can go on and on. So love to be a resource for folks too, from a mental health standpoint.
We'll do it again. It's always so beneficial for us to to hear from folks that do this professionally and have obviously have a passion for it and have made their life and helping others overcome anxieties and fears. And so kudos to you. We appreciate all that you do for everybody around you. And Dr. Holly, we'll put your information in the show notes as well.
Okay.
So if somebody wants to reach out to you and contact you, they'll have the ability to do so. So check the show notes. With that being said, thank you for joining the From the Flight Deck podcast. And that's all we have for today.
Down